Welcome, everyone, to Her Notebook podcast. For this episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky. Professor Lyubomirsky earned her undergraduate degree in psychology from Harvard University and her PhD in social and personality psychology from Stanford. She's originally from Moscow and came to the United States as a child and has become one of the world's most decorated researchers in the science of human happiness. She currently holds the title of Distinguished Professor of Psychology at UC Riverside in California, where she's published over 180 peer-reviewed journals, articles, and delivered over 100 invited lectures at academic conferences around the world. She's also a well-known author of multiple books, among them The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness, which have been translated in over 30 languages. More recently, Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky has published How to Feel Loved, The 5 Mindsets That Get You More of What Matters Most, a book she co-authored with psychologist Harry Rees. We'll spend our time today talking about this idea because I think it addresses a question that is right at the heart of what it means to be human, not just how to be happy, but how to feel loved. Sonja, welcome, and we are honored to have you at the Her Notebook podcast today.
Thank you so much.
So I want to give our listeners a little bit of background on your most recent book. So I thought maybe we could begin with the overview of the 5 mindsets that you write about in the book.
Yes, of course. So the book is about how to feel more loved and how to help other people in your life feel more loved. And really one of the key take-home messages is if you want to feel more loved, you need to be known. And if you want other people to feel more loved, you need to really know them, get to know them, know what they are inside, and they need to know what you are like inside, what really matters to you. And so the 5 mindsets are really about how to have conversations in which we really get to know each other and we feel loved and understood and appreciated by each other. The first mindset we talk about is called the sharing mindset. And so since it's important to be known and to know other people, it's very important to share. And most of us don't really share that much of ourselves to other people. We mostly just share the positive part, or maybe just a little bit, the tip. And so sharing more of yourself is very important. And that doesn't mean oversharing. You don't have to dump your traumas on the other person or your secrets, but just sharing more of what really matters to you, what's meaningful to you. So that's the first one. And I assume we'll maybe have time to get back to some of these. The second one we call the listening to learn mindset. So imagine the other person is sharing and you're listening. Most of us are not very good listeners, right? Most of us are, when we're listening, we're really trying to rehearse our answer, our response, what we're going to say next, or we're thinking about whatever's going on in our minds. There's a lot of inner chatter that happens in our heads. We say it's important to listen to learn instead of listening to respond or listening to fix, right? So listening to learn is you're really trying to learn something. We say, try to listen to the other person. When you're having a conversation, whether it's with your partner or your colleague or your family member or your friend, you try to listen to them like you're going to be quizzed tomorrow on what they're saying, like you're really trying to learn and remember. The third mindset we call radical curiosity. And this is like listening is not enough. You need to be really curious about the other person. When you think about it, what was the last time someone was really curious about you? It's so magical, right? When they can't wait to hear what you're saying. And so radical curiosity, it's showing that enthusiasm. It's showing that you really care, and asking a lot of questions, right? So one research shows that people don't ask each other enough questions. We think, oh, it'll be too personal. They'll think we're prying. They think that it'll be awkward or uncomfortable, but actually, on average, people want to be asked. We crave to be asked questions. And so that's part of radical curiosity, part of listening too, because when you're listening, you're also asking questions that show that you've been listening. The fourth mindset is called the open heart mindset. And this is something I think most relationships have, the open heart. That's basically showing kindness, compassion to the other person, showing warmth, really believing in the other person, believing in their dreams, believing in what they want to become, and really supporting them in the person they want to become. So it's not just, you really feel seen and understood when the other person, loves you not just for who you are, but for who, like they really see who you want to be in the future, right? And they support you with that. So that's the open heart mindset. And the last mindset is called multiplicity. And this is when the other person is telling their story, and maybe you're disapproving about some of the things they're telling you. Maybe you see a side of them that's not so positive, right? Multiplicity, what do you do then? Well, multiplicity is using a lens to see the other person where you really see them in their full kind of human, messy complexity, right? So even when they're showing, they're telling you a story about something maybe you don't like, you try to have compassion. You try to understand that this doesn't define them. Like if all of us have traits or have done behaviors that are not so good, right? And so we're all kind of like many, many things. And so we're trying to understand that all humans contain multitudes, right? There's sort of multiplicity. So that's the last mindset.
So many important ideas. So
Yeah.
many things that I found quite powerful in the book was that it talks about changing the conversation, not changing yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a very powerful idea that when you want to feel
Yeah.
more, like, let's say a lot of us are loved, but we don't feel loved. And so when you want to feel more loved, we often think, oh, I need to somehow change myself. I need to make myself more lovable, right? I need to show how wonderful I am to the other person, and then they'll love me more, right? So that's one response. Or you feel like I somehow need to change the other person. I need to sort of convince them to love me more or to show more love to me. And what we say, and these are all things that are actually hard to do, right? Changing yourself or changing the other person. And we say it's actually much more doable than that. It's much more under your control. It's much more under your power. You don't need to change yourself if you want to feel more loved. You don't need to change the other person. You just need to change the conversation you're having. Because a relationship is basically a series of conversations, right? It's just, even when we're not talking, we're really communicating all the time in a relationship. Um, and so that seems much more feasible, right? Much more under your control is how do you change the next conversation or the next five conversations that you have with your best friend, with your romantic partner, with your daughter, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
So this idea that you can be loved but not feel loved, right? What actually psychologically is happening there?
It's a really complicated question. We did a survey, my co-author Harry Reese and I did a survey expressly for our book, where we found that 70% of people reported not feeling as loved as they'd like to be in at least one relationship in their lives. And I think that a lot of us are loved, but they don't feel loved. And so I don't know, there's different reasons for it. Imagine like this is my cup of love, right? And you love me and you're pouring love into the cup. Maybe I don't recognize it. Maybe I don't see it. Maybe I don't trust it. Maybe I don't think of it as authentic. Maybe there's a hole in the bottom of the cup. And so love gets in, but it somehow leaks out. Maybe there's a lid on top of the cup and just a little opening on the top. And so there's not really much to opening for it to get in. So somehow it's not getting in. So there's lots of reasons, I think, why we're not feeling as loved as we want to be. And our book is not really so much about that. It's really about what to do
Right.
after you realize this.
How do you even measure that? How did you guys measure feeling
Mm.
loved?
Well, we just ask people directly. So psychologists usually rely on self-reports. Things in psychology, there's no thermometer for like feeling loved. You can't just put a thermometer on someone's head and be like, oh, or I don't know, some kind of brain measure. Um, we don't have that. Same thing for happiness, same thing for personality, for preferences, decisions. You have to sort of ask the person. So we ask people, do you feel loved? And if they say, I don't feel loved, we believe them.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
So the sharing mindset, right?
Mhm.
That one asks you to show your vulnerabilities, which is what you were
Mhm.
describing before,
Mhm.
rather than your very polished self. And
Mhm.
I think in general, people tend to not want to share some of their vulnerabilities. So how do you help someone take that
Mhm.
first step when the fear of exposure can be very real?
Absolutely. And some people tell me, maybe they had an experience when they were a child where they shared something and they really got punished for it, right? Maybe they got judged for it. It was used against them. And then they never want to share again. It's just sometimes it's a one-time thing. Well, there's something called in psychology called the vulnerability paradox, which is that we think that if we are vulnerable, people will like us less. And actually, people on average like us more when we're vulnerable. And so, one thing I guess is I would say, like, to know this is useful. I think if you knew this, it might help you, give you a little bit more encouragement to share more. But mostly the advice I give that we give in our book with me and Harry Reese and I, is to start small, to start small or start medium, so you don't just immediately spill your secrets. You don't want to overshare. You want to read the room. You want to gauge the other person's interest in you. Do they really want you to share? And then again, start small. If someone asks you, how are you? And if you get the sense, sometimes you realize, sometimes you can tell they don't really want to know how you are, right? They're just saying it to be polite, maybe. But if you think that there's an opening, maybe you say something a little bit more than just fine, right? You might say, "Oh, I'm having this, I'm struggling a little bit today with my son, or I had a challenging morning today." Or it doesn't have to be negative. It could just be like, today actually I was, I was feeling really calm. That's something that I really value. Or I was just talking about values in a class that I'm teaching, and we're talking about the value of authenticity because it's something that I really care about. You might say like, yeah, you really feel like I was able to sort of be my authentic self today. And because I wore something today. I was talking to a friend today, honestly, that who like is in fashion, and he helps people kind of show their true self and what they're wearing, which is really interesting. And so I could say, I wore a dress today that really made me feel like myself, that I don't usually wear. Anyway, it could be anything, but it just whatever, like, what is it like to be you on the inside? Like only right? What it's like to be you on the
Yeah.
inside and to share a little bit more of that inner self with other people. That's the sharing mindset.
From all the mindsets, is there one that your research suggests that people find most difficult?
I would say multiplicity. It really depends on the person. We actually have a quiz. So we have our website for our book is howtofeelloved.com, just the title, howtofeelloved.com. And we have a quiz that people can take. It's just a 5-minute quiz where you basically find out which is your top mindset and which is your bottom mindset. So actually, I can tell you that the overall data, it's going to depend on for different people. Like some people find sharing very difficult. It also depends on the relationship. Maybe you share very well with your best friend, but not with your parents. But I think over the lowest scores tend to be on multiplicity. It's really the hardest. Basically, one of my kind of pet theories is that humans it was evolutionarily adaptive for us humans to be judgmental, in our
Mm.
ancestral past. It's like you meet a stranger or maybe or a tangential, friend of a friend, you need to sort of make a judgment, a snap judgment. Are they a friend or are they a foe? And so I think we typically are judgmental. Like that's our like immediate reaction to people, especially when we find something negative about people. And I'm sure your listeners have lots of examples, right? Some of you they find someone says something kind of nasty, or they do something, or they unreliable, and they never call you back. Lots of things that people do that upset us, and our first reaction often is like, oh, what a jerk, or I can't believe it, she's so selfish, and I do that too. Like it's often our immediate snap judgment, and so multiplicity requires you to override that snap judgment, right? To sort of with effort and energy, and intention to override that and to sort of be like, okay, well, yes, they exhibited this behavior that showed, that they were being, self-focused, they a little selfish, right? Why is that? I also know that they're actually a really good person in these other ways. So you might remember, what else they are
Yeah.
about. Or maybe you think, I actually can see from their childhood why they would act this way. Now, it gives you compassion for them and understanding. It doesn't mean it's not an excuse. It's not condoning or excusing their behavior, but it's sort of seeing it in a more complex way. And that's really hard to do. Again, it takes deliberate effort to do that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally can see that. I think the idea is maybe judge that moment, not the person. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Judge the moment, judge the behavior. And by
Yeah.
the way, this is like what parenting books say, right? If your child misbehaves, you don't say, "Oh, you're a bad person," but like you did something. I mean, maybe not use the word bad, right? You did made a poor judgment, and so it's about the behavior or the moment, not about the whole person. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I think about it. Yeah.
Mm,
What do you do when you are the one trying to provide the love, but the other
mhm,
person simply doesn't feel
mm,
that love? You know, we mentioned before, no matter what you do.
yeah.
And is there a point where you just need to recognize you
Mhm,
need to walk away, or
mhm.
and how do you do that?
Yeah, it's so hard. This is so hard. It's interesting because people often ask me the opposite, which is like, what if you're trying to do everything to feel loved and the person is just not responding? And your question is actually, I love it. It's because it's really about how to make other people feel loved, right? And you're trying to, let's say you have a partner, and we see this a lot, like in therapy. Do you know the show Couples Therapy? It's
Yes.
this, yeah, it's a show. It's a great show, right? It's real couples in New York, and you see them arguing and whatever, having conflict, and then there's a therapist, and often that is the case that like no matter what one person does, the other person does not feel loved, no matter what. And so this is kind of part of your question, right? Like you're trying to do everything, you're trying to listen and be curious and show compassion, show multiplicity, share, and yet they still aren't, and it's that's really, really hard. I guess I would say really think about the five mindsets and try to use all five mindsets on this person, now, sometimes people's maybe their self-esteem is so low. If you don't love yourself, or if you're very anxiously attached, I was talking about the cup of love, you're pouring love onto them and it's just all leaking out. It's not even getting in. They may not even be noticing it. They don't think it's genuine. It's hard to convince that person that you really love them. But you could also ask, what can I do to make you feel more loved? Which is, I know, it's actually a kind of a intimate, vulnerable question because maybe you don't know, or you're not expressing it in the way that they really are seeing it. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I want to switch the focus a little bit because I know we have limited time. There has been a lot of articles and a lot of discussion about this thought that we're living through this loneliness epidemic.
Hmm.
And your book suggests that the solution possibly isn't more interaction, but better quality interaction.
Hmm.
Why do you suppose we keep choosing quantity over depth, even though we know that depth is what we truly need?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I actually think we're not choosing quantity either. We're not having that many social interactions, especially face to face, in person ones. There's a new book out by a colleague called A Little More Social, and it's about really just having more social interactions. And there's definitely research that shows that just having even the little hello, saying hello to your barista, or having a little chat with someone sitting next to you on the bus or on the airplane makes you happier, makes you feel a little bit less lonely, less alone in the world. So I think quantity is also important, but quality is even more important, right? And this is, of course, what our book is about. Is like, if you're having only like really shallow kind of interactions, where neither of you are really showing more of yourself. You love, the World Cup is happening right now. You love soccer, and you're talking to people about soccer. That's great. I mean it's still, and that makes you feel a little bit less lonely, I think, to have those conversations with people who are also share your same passion with. That doesn't always happen. Often we're just kind of having small talk that's not really doesn't make you feel more connected. What makes us feel really connected is again showing more of ourselves and asking other people about what's their inner life. Again, it doesn't have to be something negative, it doesn't have to be a secret. Is just something more meaningful. Like what is it that matters to you? And so I actually like to ask people like I went to a party in Spain actually last weekend, and I had this sort of goal that I was going to ask people what their sort of dreams are, who they want to be. A dream doesn't have to be a career; it could be the kind of person. And so it was so fascinating. Like one person said, they really want to become a writer, like a novelist, a writer. That's not what they're doing now, and they're really trying to do it in their spare time. And so we talked about that. Another person said they really want to become more calm and more patient. And that was sort of their goal, their dream, to work on that. And I just felt like those conversations were just so much more meaningful, so much more intimate. I really bonded with people over those kinds of conversations.
No, actually, you brought something that reminded me of a question I had when I was reading your book is,
Mhm.
do the mindsets that you describe apply
Yeah.
universally across cultures, across generations,
Mhm.
equally, let's say, across genders? Or does the
Yeah.
science show meaningful differences in how we give and receive love?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we actually have. two chapters in the book. One is about do they apply differently in different kinds of relationships, right? With neighbors versus colleagues, like at work versus at home. And they do, of course, apply a little bit differently, and I can mention that a little bit. And then we also have a chapter on do they apply differently across cultures or genders or personalities? And I guess I would say the word universal is a very strong word, but I would say they are, quote, universal in the sense that they just need to be adapted a little bit for, for different types of people, right? So for example, there are cultures that are more talking cultures, and there are cultures that are more listening cultures, right? And so the sharing mindset is going to look a little bit different, if you're come from a talking versus a listening culture. And listening mindset is going to look a little bit different, but it's still important to share and to listen. It's just maybe you look for sort of different kind of cues. If your romantic partner doesn't share that much, maybe there's you find sort of ways to get them to share that's going to look a little bit different from how you share, right? It might be like a little bit less or a little bit less often, or different kinds of stories that they might tell. We have a little section on neurodivergence. People who are neurodivergent might have, well, there's obviously different ways of being divergent, but some people might not catch certain cues in conversation, not sort of be able to tell when the person maybe not read their emotions as well. So using the mindsets is going to look a little bit different, if your best friend is neurodivergent or from a different culture, but still it's the same idea. It's the same idea, which is that how do you really become known to the other person, and how do they know you? And that's the same bottom line.
Interesting. Okay, so we promised we would only keep Sonja today for 30 minutes, although we would love to have her longer. So we are coming almost to the end of our time. We have a tradition at the Her Notebook podcast where we ask our guests to provide an actionable advice to our listeners. So the question for you is, if someone listening today could take one thing from your book and practice it this week, what would you want it to be?
I would say have more, at least 15-minute conversations with people. So if it's a week, if it was just one day, I would say have one more conversation that you would not otherwise have. And then when you're having that conversation, show curiosity, listen, and share. And listen with warmth and acceptance, which is basically use the mindsets. If it's a whole week, maybe every day try to have one more conversation that you don't normally have, at least 15 minutes long, ideally even longer. And it could be on the phone. Ideally, in person is great. But it could be on video. We actually did a study that showed that any kind of mode of communication that involves voice is almost as good as in person. So, which means phone, video, or in person, face to face. If there's no voice, I think because there's something hardwired, right? We're sort of hardwired to respond to voice. But if there's no voice, if it's just texting, by the way, has its own, value as well. But I would suggest having a conversation that involves voice, at least 15 minutes, one a day, and try to use all 5 mindsets. Share and listen with curiosity, warmth, and acceptance.
And on that note, I thank you for tuning in today, and a big thank you to you, Sonja, for taking the time to be here with us today. So for those of you who would like a copy of the book, How to Feel Loved, it's available on Amazon, right? Both in English and Spanish?
Exactly. Yeah, you can get it any kind of bookseller. And again, our website is just the title, howtofeelloved.com, and you can get all that information on the website, any information you need. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
As we close, I want to thank you for joining me on the Her Notebook podcast. I hope today's conversation brought you some knowledge and sparked new insights. If you enjoyed this episode, I humbly ask that you please remember to click the subscribe button below. Until next time, keep flipping your notebook pages and embrace the journey to a healthier, happier you.